I realized recently that I don't want to keep working for the rest of my life anymore. And before somebody misunderstands what I mean by that, I'm not saying that I want to sit around doing absolutely nothing all day. I'm not saying that I have become lazy. I'm not saying that I have lost all ambition. What I'm saying is that after spending decades pushing, striving, building, worrying, planning, stressing, grinding, and constantly feeling like I needed to be moving toward the next thing, I finally reached a point where I started asking myself a question that I had never seriously asked before. What if enough is enough? What if I've already spent enough years proving myself? What if I've already spent enough years chasing goals? What if I've already spent enough years trying to build a life that looks successful from the outside while completely ignoring whether that life actually makes me happy? The reason I started asking myself those questions is because something changed recently. For the first time in years, I slowed down. I stopped chasing every opportunity. I stopped paying attention to every headline. I stopped obsessing over everything happening in the world. I stopped acting like I needed to have an opinion on every controversy and every crisis. I stopped checking what everybody else was doing. I stopped measuring myself against people I have never met. I stopped feeding myself a constant stream of information 24 hours a day. Instead, I did something that sounds ridiculously simple. I sat down, relaxed, and started enjoying myself again. The strange thing is that I did not realize how badly I needed that until I actually gave myself permission to do it. One of the things that played a surprisingly large role in that was gaming. Now, some people are going to roll their eyes when they hear that because they immediately assume that gaming is just a distraction or for or a waste of time. But I think those people are missing the point entirely. The point is not the games themselves. The point is what the games represented. They represented something that had been missing from my life for a very long time. They represented leisure. They represented peace. They represented an activity that I was doing purely because I enjoyed it and not because it would make me money, improve my status, increase my productivity, or help me get ahead of somebody else. It was something I was doing simply because I wanted to do it. And I honestly cannot remember the last time I allowed myself to spend significant amounts of time doing something for that reason alone. For months, I had an Odin 2 portal sitting around waiting for me to set it up properly. Every time I looked at it, I would tell myself that I would get around to it later. There was always something more important to do. There was always another project. There was always another responsibility. There was always another task demanding my attention. Then one day I finally sat down and configured everything. I installed emulators. I installed software that allowed me to run all kinds of games. I set up my library. I started exploring what the device could actually do. Before long, I was playing everything from classic retro titles to modern games. Suddenly, I had access to thousands of games spanning decades of gaming history, many of which I had either never played or had not touched since I was a kid. What surprised me was not how good the games were. What surprised me was how different I felt. For years, my attention had been under constant assault. Every website wanted something from me. Every platform wanted something from me. Every company wanted something from me. Every social media feed wanted something from me. Every notification wanted something from me. Every advertisement wanted something from me. Every political movement wanted something from me. Every news story wanted something from me. Everywhere I looked, there was somebody demanding my attention, my energy, my time, my emotions, or my money. Then suddenly I found myself sitting in bed playing a game from 20 years ago and realizing that for the first time in a long time, nobody wanted anything from me at all. That feeling is difficult to describe if you have not experienced it. It felt like a pressure valve had been released. It felt like years of tension were slowly draining away. It felt like I had stepped outside of a machine that had been running continuously for so long that I had forgotten it was even there. I think a lot of men are experiencing something similar right now, although they may be arriving there through different paths. Some are getting there through gaming. Some are getting there through hobbies. Some are getting there through remote work. Some are getting there through living simpler lives. Some are getting there by withdrawing from social media. Some are getting there by avoiding relationships altogether. The details are different, but the destination often looks remarkably similar. They are finding peace. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this is why so many men are walking away from things that previous generations considered mandatory. A lot of people look at the rise in men choosing to stay single and immediately assume there must be something wrong. They assume men are lonely. They assume men are confused. They assume men are struggling. What if a significant number of those men are simply making a different calculation than previous generations made? What if they are looking at the costs, looking at the rewards, and deciding that they would rather spend their time elsewhere? Whether people agree with that decision is almost irrelevant because the important thing is that more men appear to be making it. The same thing is happening when it comes to work. We are living through a period where more people than ever have begun questioning assumptions that previous generations accepted without hesitation. For decades, the script was simple: go to school, get a job, work for 40 years, retire if you are lucky. That script made sense when people believed that following it would reliably lead to a stable and comfortable life. The problem is that many people no longer believe that. Costs have gone up, housing has become more expensive, everyday life has become more expensive. At the same time, many jobs have become more demanding, more stressful, and less secure. As a result, more people are asking whether the sacrifices are still worth making. What I find fascinating is that economists have been documenting trends showing that men are participating in the workforce at lower rates than they once did, and many people immediately interpret that as evidence of failure. They see men leaving the workforce and assume that those men have somehow been defeated. I think that explanation is far too simple. Certainly, there are men who are struggling, and I do not want to dismiss that reality, but there are also men who have consciously chosen to build lives outside of traditional employment structures. Some work remotely, some freelance, some do consulting work, some participate in the gig economy, some run small online businesses, some live on far less money than previous generations would have considered acceptable. Some rely on various safety nets if they qualify. Regardless of the path they choose, many of them seem united by a desire to regain control over their time. That point is important because time is the one resource that cannot be replenished. You can lose money and earn more money. You can lose possessions and acquire new possessions. You can lose opportunities and discover new opportunities. You cannot recover time. Once a day is gone, it is gone forever. Once a year passes, it never comes back. The older I get, the more aware I become of that reality. When I was younger, time felt unlimited. It felt like there would always be more of it. Now I understand that every year matters, every month matters, every day matters. That realization changes how you evaluate the choices in front of you. I spent many years believing that happiness existed somewhere in the future. I thought happiness would arrive after enough accomplishments had accumulated. I thought happiness would arrive after enough goals had been achieved. I thought happiness would arrive after enough money had been earned. The problem with that mindset is that the finish line keeps moving. Every time you reach one destination, another destination appears. Every time you accomplish one goal, another goal presents itself. The pursuit never ends because the system depends on keeping you in pursuit. Eventually, I started wondering whether happiness had been available the entire time, and I had simply been too distracted to notice it. The answer, at least for me, was yes. What made me happy was not another achievement. Like, what made me happy was slowing down. What made me happy was removing unnecessary stress from my life. What made me happy was reclaiming control over my attention. What made me happy was disconnecting from the constant noise. What made me happy was waking up without feeling like I needed to immediately plug myself into an endless stream of information. What made me happy was realizing that I did not need to participate in every argument, follow every trend, or care about every controversy. That is when I started making even more changes. I installed tools that removed recommendations from websites. I blocked endless short form content. I removed distractions. I stopped allowing algorithms to dictate what I watched. Instead of being pulled from one piece of content to another, I started intentionally choosing what I wanted to consume. It sounds like a small change, but the effect was enormous. I began spending less time online and more time actually enjoying my life. The more distance I created between myself and the attention economy, the better I felt. What shocked me most was how quickly my priorities began changing. Things that once seemed incredibly important suddenly looked trivial. The endless race for status started feeling pointless. The pressure to impress other people started feeling pointless. The pressure to keep up with everyone else started feeling pointless. I began asking myself, whether many of the goals I had been pursuing were actually my goals in the first place, or whether they had simply been inherited from a culture that constantly tells people they should want more, buy more, achieve more, and consume more. The conclusion I eventually reached was both simple and uncomfortable. I think a lot of men are tired. I think they are tired in a way that goes much deeper than physical exhaustion. I think they are mentally tired, emotionally tired, socially tired. They are tired of constantly being told that they need to become more, while rarely being encouraged to appreciate what they already have. They are tired of feeling like their worth is measured entirely by their output. They are tired of living in a world that often seems determined to extract as much energy from them as possible, while giving very little back in return. Once a man reaches that point, something interesting tends to happen. He begins looking for peace with the same intensity that he once pursued success. The difference is that peace often requires subtraction rather than addition. It requires removing things instead of acquiring them. It requires reducing obligations instead of accumulating them. It requires creating space instead of filling every available moment. That is the journey I have been on recently. And the more I experience it, the more convinced I become that I am not alone. The reason I believe so many men are heading in this direction is because once you discover peace, you begin noticing all the things that were stealing it from you. You start looking at your life differently. You start evaluating every commitment differently. You start evaluating every relationship differently. You start evaluating every responsibility differently. Instead of asking what something can give you, you begin asking what something is going to cost you. Not just financially, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. You begin asking whether something will add to your quality of life or subtract from it. You begin asking whether it will make your days better or simply make your days busier. That is a very different way of looking at the world than the mindset I had when I was younger. When I was younger, I assumed that being busy was a sign of success. If somebody was always working, always running around, always stressed, always overloaded with responsibilities, society treated that person as though they were important. We almost celebrate exhaustion. We almost treat burnout like a badge of honor. Somebody tells us they work 80 hours a week and people nod with approval. Somebody tells us they have not taken a vacation in years and people act impressed. Somebody tells us they are constantly overwhelmed and somehow that becomes evidence that they are productive. The older I get, the stranger that mindset seems to me, because what is the point of building a life that you never actually have time to enjoy? That question became impossible for me to ignore after I slowed down. The more I relaxed, the more I realized that much of what I had been chasing was not making me happier. It was simply keeping me occupied. There is a huge difference between being fulfilled and being occupied. A lot of people spend their entire lives confusing those two things. They stay busy enough that they never have to think about whether they are actually enjoying themselves. They stay busy enough that they never have to confront whether their sacrifices are producing the results they wanted. They stay busy enough that they never have to ask whether there might be another way to live. I think many men are finally asking that question now, and the answer they are arriving at looks very different from what previous generations expected. Instead of dreaming about larger houses, they are looking for smaller expenses. Instead of dreaming about climbing corporate ladders, They are looking for flexibility. Instead of dreaming about impressing strangers, they are looking for comfort. Instead of dreaming about accumulating more responsibilities, they are looking for fewer responsibilities. It is not necessarily because they lack ambition. It is because they have redefined what success means. For a long time, success was defined externally. Success meant having things that other people could see. Success meant demonstrating status. Success meant proving that you were winning some invisible competition. What I have started noticing is that a lot of men no longer care about that competition. They do not care whether strangers think they are successful. They care whether they are happy. They care whether they are peaceful. They care whether they can wake up without feeling dread. They care whether they have enough free time to enjoy the life they are working so hard to support. One of the things that fascinates me about gaming is that it unintentionally revealed this shift in priorities to me. For years, I looked at gaming as something I squeezed into whatever free time remained after everything else was done. Work came first, responsibilities came first, productivity came first. Relaxation happened afterward if there happened to be any energy left. What I discovered recently is that there is something deeply valuable about having activities in your life that exist solely for enjoyment. They do not need to be monetized. They do not need to become side hustles. They do not need to become businesses. They do not need to become opportunities. They can simply exist because they make your life better. That sounds obvious, but we live in a culture that constantly encourages people to monetize everything. Every hobby becomes a potential business. Every skill becomes a potential source of income. Every interest becomes a potential side hustle. Every moment becomes an opportunity to optimize something. Eventually, people forget how to enjoy things for their own sake. They start evaluating every activity based on its productivity rather than its contribution to their happiness. I think that is one reason why so many men are rediscovering old hobbies, whether it is gaming, fishing, hiking, woodworking, collecting, reading, or any number of other activities. What they are really rediscovering is the ability to spend time in ways that are not entirely defined by economic output. They are rediscovering activities that allow them to exist outside of constant performance metrics. They are rediscovering activities that allow them to simply enjoy being alive. The more I thought about this, the more I began seeing connections between my own experiences and larger trends happening around us. Every time I hear somebody talk about men opting out of dating, opting out of marriage, opting out of traditional career paths, or opting out of various social expectations, I hear people immediately searching for a flaw in the men themselves. They assume the men must be broken. They assume the men must be struggling. They assume the men must be failing. What rarely gets considered is the possibility that many of these men have simply changed their priorities. Imagine spending years being told that happiness is located at the top of a mountain. Imagine spending decades climbing that mountain. Imagine sacrificing time, energy, relationships, and experiences because you believe happiness is waiting at the summit. Then imagine reaching a point where you stop climbing long enough to look around and realize that some of the happiest moments of your life happened nowhere near the summit at all. They happen during quiet evenings. They happen while spending time with friends. They happen while enjoying hobbies. They happen while relaxing. They happen while living rather than striving. Once you realize that, your relationship with ambition changes. I think that is happening to a lot of men right now. They are discovering that peace produces a kind of satisfaction that status never quite delivers. Status always demands more status. Achievement always demands more achievement. There is always another mountain. There is always another benchmark. There is always another level to reach. Peace is different. Peace does not demand escalation. Peace allows you to appreciate what already exists. That realization becomes even more powerful when you start removing sources of unnecessary stress. One of the biggest changes I made was reducing my exposure to social media. I am not saying that social media is inherently evil. I am saying that I eventually realized it was not making my life better. It was consuming enormous amounts of my attention while giving very little back in return. The more time I spent away from it, the better I felt. The less I scrolled, the calmer I became. The less I followed endless arguments, the less angry I felt, the less I exposed myself to constant outrage, the more peaceful my days became. What surprised me most was how little I missed it. That was perhaps the most revealing part of the entire process. I expected to feel disconnected. I expected to feel uninformed. I expected to feel left out. Instead, I felt relieved. The things that once seemed urgent turned out not to be urgent at all. The controversies that dominated online conversations disappeared from my mind within days. The endless cycle of outrage revealed itself for what it was: entertainment disguised as importance. Meanwhile, my actual life improved. I slept better. I felt calmer. I enjoyed my hobbies more. I spent more time focused on things that genuinely mattered to me. I became more present. I became more appreciative of simple pleasures. I became less interested in proving things to strangers and more interested in enjoying my own existence. I think this is where many men eventually arrive after enough years of grinding. At some point, they begin questioning whether they have been pursuing the right objectives. At some point, they begin wondering whether the things they were told to value actually deserve the importance they have been given. At some point, they stop asking how they can get more and start asking how little they actually need. That is another lesson I have been learning recently. Most men require far less than society assumes. If you strip away status competitions and social expectations, many men are surprisingly easy to satisfy. Give them enough resources to live comfortably, give them enough freedom to control their time, give them a few hobbies they enjoy, give them a peaceful environment, give them some close friends, give them a sense of independence. For many men, that is enough. The reason this realization matters is because it changes the entire equation. A man who believes happiness requires constant accumulation will spend his life chasing. A man who realizes happiness may require very little becomes much harder to motivate through promises of future rewards. He becomes less interested in sacrificing the present for hypothetical benefits that may never arrive. He becomes more protective of his time. He becomes more selective about his commitments. He becomes more cautious about anything that threatens the peace he has worked so hard to build. That brings me back to where I started. I do not want to work anymore in the way I once did. I do not want my entire existence organized around productivity. I do not want every waking moment measured according to output. I do not want to spend the rest of my life running on a treadmill that never stops. I still want to create things. I still want to accomplish things. I still want to contribute, but I want those activities to support my life rather than consume it. That distinction is becoming increasingly important to me because I am beginning to understand something that younger versions of myself could never fully appreciate. Life is not a dress rehearsal. There is no guarantee that we get another chance. There is no guarantee that someday arrives exactly the way we imagine it. There is no guarantee that all the sacrifices we make today will produce the future we envision tomorrow. What we do have is the present. What we do have is today. What we do have is the ability to decide how we spend our time while we are here. And after spending years chasing one definition of success, I think a lot of men are arriving at a different definition entirely. They are looking around and realizing that peace may be the most valuable thing they possess. Once they discover that, protecting it becomes a priority. Once they discover that, they become much less willing to trade it away. Once they discover that, many of the things they once chased begin losing their appeal. The interesting part is that from the outside, this can look like withdrawal. It can look like disengagement. It can look like giving up. But from the inside, it often feels completely different. From the inside, it feels like freedom. From the inside, it feels like clarity. From the inside, it feels like finally understanding what matters and what does not. What really changed my perspective was realizing that most of the pressure I had been carrying around was pressure that I had accepted without ever questioning whether it deserved a place in my life. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but think about how many assumptions people inherit without ever examining them. We are handed a script from the time we are young. We are told what success looks like. We are told what happiness looks like. We are told what a meaningful life looks like. We are told what milestones matter and which ones do not. Then we spend years moving from checkpoint to checkpoint, rarely stopping to ask whether the destination we are pursuing is actually one we selected for ourselves. The longer I have lived, the more I have realized that many people are running on autopilot. They are chasing goals they never consciously chose. They are fulfilling expectations they never personally agreed with. They are living according to values that belong to somebody else. I think that realization hits men especially hard because many men spend most of their lives defining themselves through utility. They define themselves through what they produce. They define themselves through what they provide. They define themselves through what they accomplish. They define themselves through what they can contribute to others. The problem is that when your identity becomes tied entirely to your usefulness, you eventually reach a point where you struggle to answer a very basic question. Who are you when you stop working? Who are you when you stop producing? Who are you when nobody needs anything from you? For years, I never seriously considered that question because I was always busy. There was always another task, there was always another responsibility, there was always another reason to keep moving. Once I slowed down, I finally had the opportunity to confront that question directly. What I discovered was that I enjoyed being left alone far more than I ever expected. I enjoyed waking up without feeling like I immediately needed to engage with the rest of the world. I enjoyed moving through my day at my own pace. I enjoyed spending hours immersed in activities that brought me satisfaction without demanding anything in return. I enjoyed the absence of urgency. Most importantly, I enjoyed the absence of constant evaluation. That is something I think many people underestimate. Modern life often feels like one endless performance review. Somebody is always judging something: your appearance, your income, your career, your relationships, your achievements, your opinions, your choices. There's always some standard being applied and some expectation being measured against. Eventually, that becomes exhausting. One thing I have noticed about peace is that it creates distance between you and those expectations. Once you spend enough time living according to your own preferences, it becomes harder to care about external validation. You stop needing strangers to approve of your choices. You stop needing everyone to understand your decisions. You stop feeling obligated to justify yourself. There is something incredibly liberating about reaching a point where you realize that not everybody has to agree with the life you have chosen. They do not have to understand it. They do not have to approve of it. They do not even have to like it. If your life works for you, that is enough. That mindset has become increasingly common among men, and I think it explains a lot of what we are seeing today. There are countless conversations taking place about why men are withdrawing from certain institutions, certain expectations, and certain traditional life paths. Some people frame this as a crisis. Some people frame it as a problem that needs solving. Some people frame it as evidence that men are failing to adapt. What I suspect is happening in many cases is much simpler. Men are conducting cost benefit analyses. They are evaluating whether certain commitments improve their lives or diminish them. They are looking at outcomes instead of promises. They are looking at reality instead of expectations. That process becomes even more pronounced once a man has experienced enough disappointment. One thing that changes as you get older is that you become less impressed by narratives and more interested in results. When you are young, you're often willing to believe promises. You're willing to trust that sacrifice today will automatically create happiness tomorrow. You're willing to believe that every hardship has a guaranteed reward attached to it. Experience tends to complicate that view. You start noticing that life does not always work according to formulas. You start noticing that many people follow the rules and still end up unhappy. You start noticing that some people achieve everything they were told to pursue and still feel empty afterward. I think that is one reason why the pursuit of peace has become so appealing. Peace is tangible, peace is immediate, peace is something you can experience today. It is not a promise about the future. It is not a hypothetical reward waiting decades down the road. It is something you can feel in the present moment. You know when you have it, and you know when you do not. That clarity changes how you evaluate your decisions. For example, one thing I have become much more protective of is my attention. Attention may be the most undervalued resource in modern society. People talk endlessly about money, but money is not actually the resource most companies are competing for anymore. They are competing for your attention. Every application, every website, every platform, every advertisement, every piece of content is competing for a portion of your finite attention. The problem is that attention determines experience. What you focus on becomes your reality. If your attention is constantly directed toward negativity, conflict, outrage, and stress, your life begins to feel negative, conflict driven, stressful, and exhausting. If your attention is directed toward things that bring satisfaction, growth, enjoyment, and fulfillment, your experience changes accordingly. That realization caused me to become much more intentional about where my attention goes. I stopped treating attention as an unlimited resource. I stopped giving it away freely. I stopped allowing random people and random events to dictate my emotional state. Instead, I began asking a simple question whenever something demanded my attention. Does this actually improve my life? If the answer was no, I became increasingly comfortable ignoring it. That's just to that sounds simple, but it has profound implications. It means not every argument deserves your participation. It means not every controversy deserves your opinion. It means not every trend deserves your awareness. It means not every crisis deserves your emotional investment. There are entire industries built around convincing people otherwise. There are countless organizations that benefit when people remain distracted, agitated, and emotionally reactive. Choosing not to participate can feel almost rebellious. The funny thing is that once you stop participating, you realize how little most of it mattered. The world continues functioning, life continues moving forward. Most of the things that seemed urgent disappear almost immediately. What remains are the things that genuinely contribute to your quality of life, your relationships, your health, your hobbies, your environment, your routines, your peace of mind. Those are the things that continue mattering day after day, regardless of what happens online. That shift in perspective has made me increasingly skeptical of hustle culture. There was a period of time when hustle culture dominated almost every conversation about success. People were encouraged to optimize every minute, sleep less, work more, build faster, scale bigger, grind harder. The underlying message was always the same. If you are not exhausted, you are not trying hard enough. If you are not sacrificing constantly, you are not committed enough. If you are not overwhelmed, you are not ambitious enough. Looking back, I think that mindset created a lot of miserable people. What hustle culture rarely discusses is opportunity cost. Every hour spent working is an hour that cannot be spent elsewhere. Every commitment eliminates alternatives. Every sacrifice has a price attached to it. If somebody spends 20 years maximizing income while neglecting every other aspect of life, they may accumulate significant wealth, but they have still paid a price. They have exchanged something for that outcome. The question is whether the exchange was worth it. That question becomes increasingly important as you get older because time becomes more visible. When you are young, decades feel abstract. When you are older, decades feel concrete. You can look backward and see exactly where your time went. You can see which investments paid off and which ones did not. You can see which pursuits enriched your life and which pursuits merely consumed it. That perspective is difficult to acquire any other way. One thing I have become increasingly convinced of is that simplicity is underrated. Modern society often treats simplicity as though it is evidence of low ambition. I think the opposite may be true. Sometimes simplicity requires tremendous discipline. It requires resisting pressure. It requires rejecting expectations. It requires choosing enough in a culture that constantly insists there must always be more. The men who are choosing simpler lives are often making decisions that many people struggle to understand. They are intentionally reducing complexity. They are intentionally reducing obligations. They are intentionally reducing stress. They are creating lives that are easier to maintain and easier to enjoy. From the outside, that may look unremarkable. From the inside, it can feel transformative. That is one reason I find the conversation surrounding men so interesting. Right now, many people keep waiting for men to return to old patterns. They assume current trends are temporary. They assume men will eventually rediscover enthusiasm for the same goals that motivated previous generations. I'm not convinced that is going to happen. Once somebody experiences a different way of living, it becomes difficult to convince them to return to a lifestyle they no longer find appealing. I know that is true for me. The more peace I experience, the less interested I become in chaos. The more freedom I experience, the less interested I become in unnecessary obligations. The more control I gain over my time, the less willing I become to surrender it. That does not mean withdrawing from life. It means engaging with life selectively. It means choosing carefully. It means recognizing that every commitment carries a cost and ensuring that cost is worth paying. Ultimately, I think many men are reaching a stage where they are no longer interested in proving themselves. They are no longer interested in competing for the sake of competition. They are no longer interested in accumulating achievements simply because society expects them to. Instead, they are asking a much more important question. What kind of life do I actually want to live? Once that question becomes the guiding principle, a lot of old priorities start falling away on their own. What remains is often much simpler, much quieter, and much more satisfying than people expect. Another thing I started noticing once I stepped back from the constant grind was how much fear drives modern decision making. I do not think most people recognize it because it has become so normal that it blends into the background. People are afraid of falling behind. They are afraid of missing opportunities. They are afraid of making the wrong choices. They are afraid of being judged. They are afraid of ending up alone. They are afraid of not having enough money. They are afraid of not being successful enough. They are afraid of not measuring up to whatever standard happens to be popular at the moment. When you really examine a lot of modern behavior, you discover that fear is often sitting underneath it. People are not necessarily running towards something, they are running away from something. I spent years living that way without realizing it. I thought I was pursuing success, but in many ways, I was simply trying to avoid failure. I thought I was building security, but often I was responding to anxiety. I thought I was making rational decisions, but many of those decisions were heavily influenced by fears that I had never properly examined. Once I slowed down, I finally had enough distance to look at those fears honestly. Some of them were legitimate, many of them were not. Many of them were inherited from a culture that constantly tells people they are one bad decision away from disaster and one missed opportunity away from regret. What surprised me was discovering how much freedom exists on the other side of that fear. Once you stop allowing fear to dictate every decision, you become capable of evaluating life on its actual merits. Instead of asking what might happen if everything goes wrong, you start asking what happens if everything goes right. Instead of focusing exclusively on risks, you start paying attention to benefits. Instead of assuming that every choice must maximize future outcomes, you begin considering how those choices affect your present experience. That shift changed the way I think about lifestyle design. Most people spend an enormous amount of time thinking about income and very little time thinking about expenses. But I am not talking strictly about financial expenses, I'm talking about life expenses. Every decision has a maintenance cost attached to it. Every possession requires attention. Every obligation requires energy. Every commitment requires time. The larger and more complicated your life becomes, the more resources are required simply to sustain it. I started seeing this everywhere. Somebody buys a bigger house and gains additional responsibilities. Somebody buys more possessions and gains additional maintenance. Somebody accepts more commitments and gains additional stress. Somebody expands their lifestyle and suddenly finds themselves working harder just to maintain what they already have. There's nothing inherently wrong with any of those choices, but they often come with hidden costs that people fail to consider until much later. The older I get, the more I appreciate the value of having room to breathe. There is something incredibly satisfying about having margin in your life, margin in your schedule, margin in your finances, margin in your energy levels, margin in your attention. Modern culture encourages people to operate at maximum capacity all the time, every hour filled, every dollar allocated, every moment optimized. The problem is that when life inevitably throws something unexpected at you, there is no flexibility left. One of the reasons I enjoyed stepping away from the constant cycle of productivity was it reminded me that not every moment needs to be productive. Some moments can simply be enjoyable. Some moments can simply exist for their own sake. I think that idea has become strangely controversial because so many people have internalized the belief that every activity needs to justify itself economically. If an activity is not making money, building skills, increasing status, or producing measurable outcomes, people start questioning its value. I completely disagree with that mindset now. Some of the most valuable experiences in life produce no measurable output at all. Sitting quietly with your thoughts produces no measurable output. Watching a sunset produces no measurable output. Taking a long walk produces no measurable output. Spending time with people you care about produces no measurable output. Playing a game that makes you smile produces no measurable output. Yet those experiences often contribute more to happiness than many of the things society treats as important. That realization caused me to reevaluate how I spend my days. Instead of organizing everything around efficiency, I started organizing more things around enjoyment, not recklessness, not irresponsibility, enjoyment. There is a difference. I still believe responsibilities matter. I still believe discipline matters. I still believe planning matters. What changed was my understanding of why those things matter. They are tools, they are not destinations. They exist to support a meaningful life, not replace one. I think a lot of men eventually arrive at this realization after enough years of striving. They begin asking what all the effort is supposed to accomplish. They begin asking whether the rewards they were promised actually exist. They begin asking whether there might be another path available. Some people interpret those questions as signs of disillusionment. I think they are signs of maturity. Maturity is not simply accepting conventional wisdom without question. Maturity is being willing to evaluate whether conventional wisdom deserves to be followed in the first place. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. The important thing is that the decision becomes intentional rather than automatic. One thing I have become increasingly intentional about is protecting my environment. People often underestimate how much their environment influences their mental state. If your environment is chaotic, your thoughts often become chaotic. If your environment is noisy, your mind often becomes noisy. If your environment is constantly demanding your attention, relaxation becomes difficult. Once I started removing unnecessary distractions, I discovered how much easier it became to think clearly. This is another reason why I believe many men are gravitating toward quieter lifestyles. They are not necessarily rejecting society altogether. They are rejecting overstimulation. They are rejecting environments that leave them feeling drained. They are rejecting situations that constantly demand emotional labor without providing meaningful returns. They are seeking spaces where they can think, relax, and exist without feeling pressured. There is a major difference between isolation and solitude, and I think many people confuse the two. Isolation is unwanted separation, solitude is chosen separation. Isolation feels like deprivation, solitude feels like freedom. The distinction matters because many men who are spending more time alone are not necessarily suffering from loneliness. In many cases, they are experiencing something closer to relief. That may sound controversial to some people, but I think it reflects a reality that is often overlooked. Not everybody experiences being alone as a negative state. For some people, being alone creates opportunities for reflection, creativity, relaxation, and personal growth. For some people, solitude provides a level of peace that is difficult to achieve in crowded social environments. I discovered this myself during the period when I stepped away from much of the noise that had been consuming my attention. The more comfortable I became with my own company, the less dependent I became on external stimulation. I no longer needed constant entertainment. I no longer needed constant validation. I no longer needed constant engagement. I became increasingly comfortable simply existing. That comfort changes your perspective in interesting ways. When you are comfortable being alone, you stop approaching every decision from a position of scarcity. You stop feeling desperate for approval. You stop feeling desperate for attention. You stop feeling desperate for companionship at any cost. Instead, you begin evaluating opportunities based on whether they genuinely improve your life. I think this is one reason why so many men become more selective as they age. It is not necessarily because their standards become unrealistic. It is because their tolerance for unnecessary stress declines. They become more aware of trade offs. They become more aware of consequences. They become more aware of the fact that every decision affects the quality of their daily experience. That awareness is difficult to reverse once it develops. After you have spent enough time building a peaceful life, you become reluctant to introduce anything that threatens that peace. You become cautious. You become deliberate. You become willing to say no. Those qualities can be frustrating to people who expect automatic participation, but they are often essential for maintaining balance. One of the most important lessons I have learned recently is that saying no is not inherently negative. Many people treat saying no as though it requires justification. They treat boundaries as selfishness. They treat selectiveness as stubbornness. I see it differently. Every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. Every commitment consumes resources that cannot be used elsewhere. Understanding that reality makes it easier to establish priorities. The funny thing is that once you start prioritizing peace, many decisions become surprisingly simple. You stop overcomplicating things. You stop chasing every possibility. You stop trying to optimize every outcome. Instead, you focus on what constantly improves your quality of life. You focus on what helps you wake up feeling content. You focus on what helps you sleep peacefully at night. That may not sound exciting to people who are still captivated by ambition, competition, and endless pursuit. Years ago, it probably would not have sounded exciting to me either. Today, it sounds incredibly valuable because I have experienced both sides of the equation. I have experienced the constant chase, and I have experienced the relief that comes from stepping off the treadmill long enough to ask whether it was taking me somewhere worth going. The answer I arrived at may not be the same answer everyone else arrives at, but it has become increasingly clear to me that many men are conducting that same evaluation right now. They are looking at the lives they have built. They are looking at the expectations placed upon them. They are looking at the sacrifices they are being asked to make. Then they are asking a simple question that previous generations may not have asked often enough. Is this actually making me happy? For a growing number of men, that question is becoming more important than almost anything else. And once that happens, the entire direction of a life can begin to change. One of the strangest things about getting older is realizing how many things you spent years worrying about that never actually mattered. When you are younger, it is easy to assume that every decision carries enormous consequences. It is easy to believe that every opportunity must be seized immediately. It is easy to believe that every setback is catastrophic. Everything feels urgent because you have not yet accumulated enough experience to separate what is important from what is merely loud. Over time, that changes. You begin noticing patterns. You begin noticing how often people panic over things that are forgotten a month later. You begin noticing how often society creates artificial urgency around issues that have very little impact on your actual quality of life. Most importantly, you begin noticing how much energy gets wasted chasing things that never deliver the satisfaction they promise. I think that realization is one of the reasons why so many men eventually stop caring about status. When people are young, status appears incredibly important because it seems connected to every other desirable outcome. Status appears to offer respect, status appears to offer admiration, status appears to offer opportunity, status appears to offer security. What many people eventually discover is that status is a moving target. No matter where you arrive, there is always somebody with more. There is always somebody higher on the ladder. There is always another level that can be reached. If your happiness depends on winning that competition, then happiness remains permanently out of reach because the competition never ends. At some point, I realized I was no longer interested in competing with people I do not know for rewards I do not actually want. That sounds simple, but it completely changes how you approach life. You stop viewing every interaction as a contest. You stop viewing every achievement as a ranking system. You stop measuring your worth according to standards established by strangers. Instead, you begin asking whether your life functions well according to your own standards. For me, those standards have become remarkably simple. I want enough income to live comfortably. I want enough free time to enjoy myself. I want enough independence to control my own schedule. I want enough stability to avoid unnecessary stress. I want enough peace to think clearly. Once those conditions are met, the importance of many traditional goals begins fading into the background. The reason this matters is because modern culture often assumes that everyone is motivated by the same things. We are constantly presented with a very specific vision of success: bigger, faster, more. The assumption is that everyone wants maximum growth, maximum consumption, maximum ambition, and maximum achievement. What if that assumption is wrong? What if a significant percentage of men have reached a point where they genuinely prefer moderation? What if they are no longer interested in maximizing everything? I think this is exactly what is happening. The more I observe other men, the more I notice a quiet shift taking place. It is not dramatic, it is not organized, it is not being led by any particular group. It is simply a growing number of individuals reaching similar conclusions independently. They are questioning whether endless striving is worth it. They are questioning whether constant stress is necessary. They are questioning whether the rewards associated with traditional success justify the sacrifices required to obtain it. What fascinates me is that many of these men are not replacing one grand ambition with another. They are not leaving one race in order to join a different race. Instead, they are reducing the number of races they are willing to participate in at all. They are simplifying, they are streamlining, they are becoming increasingly selective about where they invest their energy. I experienced this firsthand when I began spending more time on hobbies that had absolutely no connection to productivity. And for years, I approached leisure almost like an obligation. Leisure was something that happened after work was finished. Leisure was something that had to be earned. Leisure was something squeezed into whatever free time remained after responsibilities had been addressed. What I eventually realized is that this mindset quietly trains people to treat enjoyment as secondary to everything else. The problem with that approach is that life has a habit of expanding to fill available space. There is always more work that could be done. There is always another project waiting. There is always another task demanding attention. If enjoyment remains permanently subordinate to productivity, many people discover that enjoyment never actually arrives. They spend decades preparing to live without ever fully living. That realization hit me while working through games that had been sitting untouched in my library for years. Some of them I had purchased with every intention of playing. Others I had collected simply because they looked interesting. Yet, despite owning them, I never seemed to have time. Looking back, that was not entirely true. The time existed. I simply kept allocating it elsewhere because I had convinced myself that other things were more important. What I discovered was that the experience itself mattered more than I expected. It was not really about gaming, it was about permission. It was about giving myself permission to enjoy my own life without feeling guilty about it. That may sound ridiculous, but I think many men understand exactly what I mean. There is often an underlying belief that relaxation must be justified, that enjoyment must be earned, that leisure must be limited. Once you challenge those assumptions, your relationship with time changes dramatically. Another thing that changed for me was how I thought about success stories. Society loves success stories. We celebrate entrepreneurs who work extreme hours. We celebrate people who sacrifice everything in pursuit of goals. We celebrate stories of relentless ambition. What we rarely celebrate are stories of contentment. We rarely celebrate people who intentionally choose smaller lives. We rarely celebrate people who decide they already have enough. That absence creates a distorted picture of reality because it suggests that only one type of life is worthy of admiration. The truth is that there are many different ways to build a meaningful existence. Some people genuinely enjoy high pressure careers. Some people genuinely enjoy building large organizations. Some people genuinely enjoy constant competition. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem arises when those preferences are treated as universal rather than personal. One of the healthiest realizations I have had is understanding that somebody else's ideal life does not need to become my ideal life. I do not need to want what they want. I do not need to pursue what they pursue. I do not need to organize my priorities around their values. Once that became clear, it became much easier to stop comparing myself to other people. Comparison is one of the most destructive habits modern technology encourages. We are constantly exposed to curated versions of other people's lives. We see accomplishments without context. We see victories without sacrifices. We see outcomes without trade offs. Over time, this creates unrealistic expectations. People begin measuring their everyday reality against somebody else's highlight reel. Stepping away from that comparison cycle was one of the best decisions I made. The less I compared my life to other people's lives, the more satisfied I became with my own. The less attention I paid to what everyone else was doing, the more clearly I could see what I actually wanted. Comparison creates noise. Clarity often requires distance. I think many men eventually reach a point where they stop seeking validation from the crowd. They realize that crowds are notoriously inconsistent. The crowd praises one thing today and condemns it tomorrow. The crowd constantly changes its standards. Building your identity yet around external approval becomes exhausting because the target never stops moving. Internal standards are different. Internal standards remain relatively stable. They are based on your own experiences, your own priorities, and your own values. They are not immune to change, but they tend to evolve deliberately rather than reactively. Once you begin living according to those standards, life becomes less confusing because decisions no longer require universal approval. That is another reason peace becomes so attractive. Peace simplifies decision making. When peace becomes a priority, many choices reveal themselves surprisingly quickly. You start noticing which activities leave you energized and which leave you drained. You start noticing which relationships contribute positively to your life and which consistently create stress. You start noticing which habits improve your well being and which quietly undermine it. The remarkable thing is that these observations often lead to subtraction rather than addition. Many self improvement discussions focus on acquiring new skills, new habits, and new strategies. Sometimes improvement comes from removing things instead, removing distractions, removing obligations, removing unhealthy patterns, removing unnecessary complexity. I think that is what I have been doing over the last several months without fully realizing it. I have been conducting a process of elimination, not because I am trying to withdraw from life, but because I am trying to identify what genuinely deserves a place within it. The result has been a life that feels lighter, calmer, and more manageable. There is a misconception that simplicity leads to boredom. My experience has been exactly the opposite. Simplicity creates space, it creates room for appreciation, it creates room for curiosity, it creates room for enjoyment. When your schedule is not overloaded and your attention is not fragmented, ordinary experiences become surprisingly satisfying. A good meal becomes more enjoyable. A good game becomes more enjoyable. A quiet evening becomes more enjoyable. A conversation becomes more enjoyable. The quality of the experience increases because your mind is actually present rather than being pulled in a dozen directions simultaneously. I suspect this is one of the reasons why so many men who step away from the constant chase report feeling better rather than worse. From the outside, observers assume they have given something up. From the inside, many of them feel as though they have gotten something back. They have gotten back their attention. They have gotten back their time. They have gotten back their ability to appreciate simple experiences without immediately converting them into productivity metrics. The older I get, the more valuable that seems, not because ambition is inherently bad, but because ambition without balance eventually becomes consumption. It consumes time, it consumes energy, it consumes relationships, it consumes experiences. If left unchecked, it can consume entire decades before you realize what happened. I do not want that anymore. I do not want to wake up 20 years from now wondering where all the time went. I do not want to postpone enjoyment indefinitely in pursuit of goals that may or may not matter. Once I reach them, I want to enjoy the process while I am living it. I want my days to feel worthwhile, even before some future milestone arrives. That may sound like a small shift in perspective, but I think it changes everything. Because once you stop treating life as preparation for a future event, you begin engaging with the present differently. You begin paying attention to the moments that are actually happening instead of constantly focusing on moments that have not happened yet. You begin understanding that a good life is not built exclusively through major achievements, it is built through thousands of ordinary days that are satisfying in their own right. And when you start looking at life through that lens, many of the assumptions you inherited from the world around you begin losing their power. You stop asking whether your life looks impressive. You start asking whether your life feels good to live. That is a completely different question. And I think more men are beginning to ask it than ever before. As I sit here thinking about everything we talked about, I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I do not think most men are looking for more anymore. I think most men are looking for enough money to live comfortably, enough freedom to control their time, enough stability to sleep well at night, enough peace to enjoy their lives without feeling like they are constantly being pulled in 100 different directions. For years, we were told that happiness was always waiting somewhere further down the road. But I think a lot of men are discovering that happiness was never hiding at the finish line. It was hiding in the moments we kept postponing. It was hiding in the hobbies we never made time for. It was hiding in the quiet evenings we thought we had to earn. It was hiding in the ability to wake up without feeling overwhelmed, to enjoy our own company, to enjoy simple things, and to stop living as though our worth depended entirely on what we could produce for everyone else. The truth is that life moves faster than most people realize. One day, you're 20 years old thinking you have unlimited time. And the next thing you know, decades have passed and you're wondering where they went. That realization changes you. It changes how you look at success. It changes how you look at stress. It changes how you look at obligations. Most importantly, it changes how you look at your remaining years. You begin understanding that protecting your peace is not weakness, it is not laziness, it is not giving up. It is simply recognizing that your time has value and deciding to spend it intentionally rather than surrendering it to expectations that no longer make sense to you. Maybe that is why so many men are walking away from things that no longer serve them. Maybe they are not running from responsibility. Maybe they are running toward peace. Maybe they are not abandoning life. Maybe they are finally trying to enjoy it. Maybe after decades of being told to keep grinding, keep building, keep sacrificing, and keep proving themselves, they have finally reached the point where they are asking a different question. Instead of asking what the world wants from them, they're asking what they want from their own lives. Once that question is asked honestly, the answers can change everything. The reality is that nobody gets to decide what a meaningful life looks like for another person. Some people will find fulfillment in careers, some will find it in family, some will find it in business, some will find it in travel, some will find it in hobbies, some will find it in quiet mornings, simple routines, and the freedom to live life on their own terms. There is no single path that works for everyone. What matters is whether the path you are walking actually leads somewhere you want to go. If it does, keep walking. If it does not, there is nothing wrong with changing direction. And that is where I think many men are today. They are changing direction, they are simplifying, they are slowing down, they are stepping away from noise, they are reclaiming their attention, they are reclaiming their time, they are rediscovering what it feels like to live for themselves instead of constantly performing for everyone else. Whether society understands it or not, that that shift is happening. And I suspect it is only going to continue as more men discover the same thing I discovered. Once you find peace, you stop treating it like something optional. You start treating it like something worth protecting. And with that said, I want to give a shout out to the 1 hour gang for making it all the way to the end. I genuinely appreciate every single one of you who stuck around for the entire discussion. If you're enjoying these angry guy videos and want to support the channel, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. I appreciate all of the support because it helps keep these conversations going. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think about everything we discussed today? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have you found yourself wanting a simpler life? Have you found yourself pulling back from the constant grind and focusing more on your own peace? Let me know down in the comments because I read what you guys have to say. And I think this is a conversation that a lot more people are starting to have. Like the video, if you like it, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.